Society Bites Radio. I'm Steve Ryan for the Coastal Progressive and Rainbow Forum, bringing you topics of interest for the progressive and LGBTQ plus communities. Today, we are lucky to have a professional geologist. His name is Mike Mitchell. He has over 50 years of experience in gas and 35 years and plus another 15 years in environmental consulting. He's going to discuss the economic threat to the area as a component of climate change. Welcome, Mike. Can you tell me a little more about yourself here?
Good evening. I've been a geologist. I'm in my 51st year. I started out my career working for Texaco in New Orleans, and I spent 35 years in the oil and gas business. I still do consulting for operators and small operators in Kentucky and Tennessee, and I'm actually part owner of a company based in Fort Myers called Bluegrass Energy, where we're trying to develop some helium projects in Kentucky. But I also spent 15 years in environmental consulting, including 3 years working as a contract employee for Region 4 of the EPA, traveling all the paved roads in the state of Kentucky.
Wow.
We have a problem in Florida with global warming, and it's not only an environmental, political, economic, and religious issue. It's a job killer. And anyone who lives in the Sarasota area or the southwest coast of Florida should know that by now after last summer.
Exactly. And I'll share something with you here too, and also our listeners. We come from some common background here too. I spent a lot of my years consulting in IT for energy companies, and a lot of mega names in the energy field, big names, and some of them we probably would have crossed paths in.
I'm sure.
Big names. But so what do you think is the greatest threat to the citizens of Florida? And I'm sure there is a pretty easy answer to this.
Sure, there is, and it's not necessarily the long term. It's the sea level rise. Sooner or later, a couple of centuries probably from now, the state of Florida will be reduced down to the size of the island of Ocala. So it's going to be interesting because most of us won't be around, but they'll have a hard time figuring out what to do with the 30 million people that are probably here at the time. But the immediate impact is witnessed by most people who are not brain dead or glued to Fox television. They would have seen last summer and late in the fall was the impact of the red tide, which is clearly, if it continues, and there's already, I get a weekly report from the state on blue-green algae, and there's already half a dozen or so spots, both east and west coast, where the blue-green algae is starting to grow. But the red tide impacted the Sarasota area significantly. 20% of the workforce was impacted. Hotel occupancies decreased 70%. Tourist and small business revenue decreased by 50%. And as what I like to be a weekly fisherman, I can tell you to this point, fishing has not recovered in Sarasota Bay yet. And a wildlife officer told me it'll be a long time before it does. The red tide has got many causes. I don't think we can blame it on any one factor, but sure as the devil, I mean, the local newspaper, the Herald Tribune, a few months ago, had an excellent article on the 23,000 sewage releases that have occurred in the last 10 years in Florida. And 65% of them were on the West Coast. And if you had an opportunity to see that article, they had a map which showed where all the sewage releases were. And that 65% on the West Coast is a perfect laydown for the highest, similar map that shows the red tide presence in parts greater than 1 million. It's a perfect laydown. The red tide impacted area from Tampa to Naples is identical to the major sewage releases between Tampa and Naples. This is a problem that could be fixed. It should have been fixed. It's simply governmental malfeasance, and it's a good lesson on what kind of politicians should be elected to city, county, and state and federal positions. And we don't need to say which party denies. There's only one party that denies global warming and man's impact on it. So you don't really need to say much more than that.
You're right. I remember when Red Tide Rick was coming, and he got chased out of a restaurant because he didn't want to answer questions. And I'm just saying, he's no longer here, but unfortunately, he's our senator now. And the damage that's been done by, and I agree with you, sir, it is politicians that created a lot of this damage. And that's who we need to point the finger at. And we have to hold them accountable. I don't know how we're going to do it except go to the polls and vote, and wake up and have a little more intelligence about some of these items.
It's kind of disappointing because I read the Sarasota paper every day. Being a dinosaur, I like to have a paper copy in my hands. And since that article was published, and it was Sunday, April 14th when it was published and distributed, I've seen only one letter to the editor. So I don't understand why the average citizen is not concerned about it. This is a serious issue. If we get to the point, and there was a point in history in the late 1800s where red tide lasted 10 years.
Oh, Lord.
But it's a naturally occurring phenomenon, but we're certainly making it worse with 23,000 sewage releases and 2.6 million.
Well, aren't those 23,000 reported sewage releases, aren't they a violation of federal law?
Each one of them is a federal crime of the Clean Water Act. That's the next
why aren't
question.
people being held accountable?
Well, that's it. I don't understand it.
Lord.
Of course, it goes back to the Obama administration. I don't understand why his EPA, which is pretty proactive, didn't put some of the Florida politicians in jail over this. But they're basically, for whatever reason they want to deny global warming and man's impact on it, they're basically killing the goose that lays a golden egg in Florida. It's going to kill tourism.
That's for sure.
Once the tourists stop coming, they'll suddenly discover with no income tax that they can't fund county and state government. The next thing that will happen when the tourists stop coming, the snowbirds and the new residents that come to Florida will quit buying property, then we're going to have a massive real estate
collapse. Yeah,
property taxes go down, and they can't fund the inadequate government they already have. And it's every voter's fault for not voting for decent politicians, regardless of their political stripe, that'll do the right thing.
And just have a little bit of common sense. You just mentioned it, and you're right. The tourism, if tourism starts faltering here, we just seen the impact that a lot of the merchants here had, and a lot of these same merchants, they vote for the party that gives them the most tax breaks and stuff. But the sad thing is, you're right. They're killing the goose that lays the golden egg, and that's tourism, and all the benefits of the snowbirds and everything that Florida relies so heavily on.
Exactly.
And I just don't understand how people cannot understand these things and see it and take action to correct them. Do you know how? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The other thing that bothers me, that there's all these sewage releases, 6 a day, someplace in the state of Florida, are bad enough. But then you got to have all these septic systems. And when I look at the state of Florida as a geologist, it's basically a 500-mile-long sandbar when you just look at the first 200 feet or so of the superficial surface. And it's all sand. And with these 2.6 million septic systems, many of them, maybe the majority of them probably, are very old, and there's hard data available to anyone who wants to research it, that septic systems tend to fail after 18 years. And in Sarasota County, there's like 60,000 septic systems. And this is in what I would consider the city. Now, the city limit may not encompass all of them, but when you've got sidewalks and you've got wall-to-wall houses across what is referred to as Sarasota, it should be the city limits. And they should have sanitary sewer service. And why that has not come about, I do not understand.
That was my next question. Why are they still allowed? They need to be phased out. I don't understand this.
Exactly. Either phased out or proven that they are not contributing to contamination of surface water.
Exactly. And
I think most of them will probably fail the test.
This is kind of eye-opening. Until you brought this up, I didn't realize we had that many in this area. Septic tanks. You'd think that most people would be, inside the city of Sarasota, is it still legal to have your septic tank in the city then? I guess it is.
I assume it is. In Sarasota County, based on county data, which is probably pretty accurate, there's 62,178 residential septic systems. Manatee County, which is a little more hard to get reliable information, they sent me some information that says there's 29,198, but I really don't believe they have a good handle on the number.
I don't think so either.
Tabulation. And the interesting thing is, nationally, and this is from EPA data that I checked out, 20% of the homes across the nation are on septic systems. In Florida, it's 30%. And we should have a goal to get it down to 10% or less, if possible, just because of the nature of the surface geology. Anything you put in the sand, any place in this state is either going to flow towards the Atlantic Ocean or the Gulf of Mexico. And then ultimately get in there and add to the witch's brew that's in the Gulf due to mostly human activity. So
and you said it there. That's exactly it. Human activity, creating part of these problems, and then we have politicians who want to deny it, and just like denying that climate change is a big chunk of it is being caused by human activity. And
our president has stated it's China's fault.
Lord, what was it I read in the news the other night? How many tens of thousands of lies he's told since he's been in office? I've
lost track. It's over 5,000.
China may be a big contributor, but they're not the only one for sure. India is a close behind them. India has horrible pollution problems as well. And like you, I lived and worked for 14 years of my life abroad in the Middle East, South Asia, Latin America, and I've seen a little bit of the world, and I've seen the good and the bad and the ugly, as you would say.
Sure.
And I, like all of us, I love this country, but we sure have room for improvement in a number of areas.
And we need to give up our arrogance. There are other countries, particularly Western European countries, that have high-speed train travel, and that's something we desperately need to adopt. I mean,
exactly.
Just if for nothing, no other reason to evacuate the state when the killer hurricane of the millennium comes towards us.
Right, exactly.
Otherwise, you'll have a parking lot on Interstate 75 and 95, when people would die in their cars.
I will tell you to insert here, and this is not only in Florida where it's inadequate planning. If you may remember, it's been a few years ago. I was living in Houston when they tried to evacuate Metro Houston when one of the hurricanes was approaching. Do you remember that